The COVID-19 crisis has had a huge impact on currencies around the world, particularly the rand, which found itself losing about 35% of its value since the start of the year. The big number was the fact that it dropped below that 19 rand to the dollar level, which is the weakest that it's been in this century alone, and the weakest it's been in over a quarter of a century. Some currencies are more equal than others. This is the lesson that a lot of people who do not typically follow exchange rates have actually learned when looking at how the rand has performed over this lockdown period. Now, when it comes to this issue of political instability and humanitarian crises like what we're going through, one of the big questions that tends to be asked is how come some currencies react more than others? Looking at the US dollar versus the rand, for example, you can easily see that the US dollar has remained relatively stable during this period versus the rand, which has weakened, quite a lot, losing a lot of its value. Because South Africa is not a reserve currency, it is susceptible to some of these shocks that happen either in the country or out of the country, versus the US dollar, where it is in the best interests of the world to keep the currency at a constant level. The second issue is an issue of perception, right? Because if you look at what's going on in the United States with some of the protests around Black Lives Matter, for example, that is unlikely to affect its currency in the same way as if something like that was happening in South Africa. For example, if I can use the Nenegate example in South Africa, where we had a quick succession of finance ministers in South Africa, and there was an immediate reaction in the exchange rate where it actually weakened by quite a bit. You can see that in such a case, there is that shock and an immediate reaction in the exchange rate. And part of the reason for that is because your investors, particularly foreign investors, always want to keep their money safe. And how do you keep your money safe? It means that you run away from risky assets and make sure that you always run to what are perceived to be safe assets. On the whole, the issue of the rand and its exchange rate can get a bit technical, quite complex. But at the end of the day, the most important things to always consider is how much goods and services is South Africa exporting versus its importing, one. The second one is just what is the perception on emerging markets, and three, what's going on around the world. And then just the last one, making sure that the country itself has itself in a good space, because that perception on emerging markets ends up being a big thing that drives people in and out.